Hello, everybody. Welcome to this moment action here. This is a program hosted by Ali Palmer and me, Samir Salmanovic, each one every other week. And here we come to pursue truth and grace and stamina as we move forward towards November 3rd, a very historical moment for all of us. And today I am very excited to have Ernest Nasto here. He's an Albanian-American economist and public policy expert who has taught both in Albania and France and has moved here to the United States and lives in Chicago. Hi, Ernesto.
Hi, Samir, and thank you for this invitation.
Yeah.
I'll be excited to talk about those misconceptions and etc.
Yeah. Ernesto and I have this sort of like an inside scoop on things because we are both from East Europe. He's from Albania and I'm from former Yugoslavia. And we have both born and grown up and became adults in socialism.
Exactly.
All right. So when we met and when we resonated, because we were able to say, yes, there's so much misinformation in United States. And so I always wanted to talk about this. I always want to tell how it was growing under socialism. What does socialism mean? What it doesn't mean? And Ernesto here has authority on this in this area. First of all, as I said, he grew up in a socialist communist dictatorship. I grew up in a kind of a soft socialism, or I would say better socialism.
Yeah.
And his higher education is in economics and political systems. And he has written a book, Nation Under God, about American Christianity and American politics, especially about last 50 years and how impactful that movement is. What I like about Ernesto is that, and about myself, like what we are bringing to the table, is that we are strangers. And strangers often can see what people cannot see, what you cannot see, and say what you cannot say.
True.
In the same way, when Americans come to Albania or Croatia, they see something and say something, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's true. And you cannot know it's true until a stranger comes and notices something that is strange to them, and they start asking questions. So, Ernesto, thanks again for being here. Tell us about you growing up. What was it like? In just a one or two sentences, what was your experience like, and what put you into the path of studying and learning about America and socialism?
Yes, as you said, I grew up in Albania under the harshest communist dictatorship in Europe, arguably. And but growing up, we had the possibility to be connected with the Western media. So we had kind of a window to the West, mainly through Italian television, etc. Doesn't matter. But what I wanted to say is that I have first-hand experience with that system because I lived there well into my adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And because of my passion for history and politics, I went to study those in university, either in Albania first and then in France.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became a professor of those
yes,
disciplines.
that riddle of
In France. So I have, I think, the necessary background to talk with socialism and to dispel any misconceptions about it that I found so.
Yeah, thank you. There are so many misconceptions going on. So what do you think is if you would come and say, to American citizens, like, what is the, first misconception that people have about socialism?
Now the first misconception that I find very widespread, Samir, is that people assume that socialism means just one thing and one thing only. And this thing being a Soviet-style dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is not true at all. because, first of all, socialism has meant several things to several people during its whole history. Socialism is a movement that was aimed to improve the conditions of the working class in Europe in 1900s, or to say it in other words, to repair or to adjust some of the most egregious defects of free market capitalism at that time. That was all. So since then, it has meant, as I said, several things to several people. So it doesn't mean that it means just one thing, and it means Soviet-style dictatorship. Unfortunately, this is the meaning which is assumed in this country when right-wing pundits or politicians or opinionists everywhere talk about the measures or want to criticize measures advocated by, let's say, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, etc. Measures that are very popular in other countries, but somehow they assume that those measures here mean that we will get to the Soviet-style dictatorship. That's all. That's a misconception.
Yeah, I was often thinking, Ernest, how incredibly traumatized Americans are by Cold War. You know, a lot of identity is like, we will lose to Russia, we will lose to communism, we are going to communism. And those of us who are in Eastern Europe, we are talking like, what are you talking about? Nobody's going to communism if you are just fair to people.
In this country, yes.
Yeah, communism is history. Hey, people, we were there. This is not going to happen, you know? So I'm progressive. I'm on the left. The last thing I want is communism. Like, that's not what I want, right? No. So in my mind, as a Easterner from East Europe, I feel that present capitalism in United States is much closer to communist dictatorship than, because it's so concentrated, it's so abusive, it's so behind closed doors. Politicians and those who own everything are talking, you know. So and a lot of people, for them, Sweden and Stalingrad is the same thing, you know, like they cannot distinguish.
Exactly. This is a very common misconception.
They cannot distinguish between the two. And when people who live in fear of it, and fear is justified if that's a communist style dictatorship, what would you tell people who are just afraid that this is all going to turn into some sort of a place where people who don't work will take all the money and all of that, all of those kind of things? What would you tell them about their fear?
This is a very good question, because it takes us directly to the second misconception that I see in this country. And the second misconception is that we can get to that Soviet-style type dictatorship, which is called wrongly socialism. We can get there to that dictatorship through a gradual increase of the government role in economy or in society in general. Now, this is not true, because it has never happened in the history of the world. Or I can say, by qualifying that a little bit, it has never happened in the history of the Western world.
Ernest, now that comes, folks who are listening to this, this is coming from a person who has spent lifetime studying history, grown up in socialist country, taught in France, and this has never happened. So
this has never happened, yes.
Right. So the fear that somehow we will drift into communist style dictatorship in which people will be, you know, which will actually crash everything, you know, and make basically personal agency and personal work and creativity and innovation and hard work not rewarded. It has never happened. It cannot happen. And so why do you think then people I think people may have heard this before, what we are saying here. But this thing has constantly been thrown into people who talk about compassion, community, humanity, simply good, virtuous, loving, hopeful things that we can do as a country. The moment we go there is the moment there is accusation that you are going to communism. Therefore, you do not have to be compassionate as a country. Therefore, you don't have to be loving. Therefore, you don't have to, talk about fairness, because that's all leading us to a worst of humanity.
Yes, that's the assumption, yes.
Ooh.
So the reality check to counter that assumption would be, as I said, to show that it has never happened in the world history, and always socialism in those countries where it has been established, or that Soviet-style dictatorship, not socialism, but that Soviet-style dictatorship, has been always a result of exceptional circumstances. It has been a result of World War I, World War II. It has been a result of revolutions to overthrow a legitimate government, even if it was a corrupted one, like in the case of Cuba. But it has never been achieved by a gradual increase of the role of the government in society and in economy. And this is unfortunately the assumption in those warnings that come from the conservative side, saying that yes, we need to counter socialism in America, as it was the theme of the last conservative political action conference in February, countering socialism in America. To me, this is like fighting with the windmills.
Yeah.
Because it has never happened. It's not an imminent danger here as it's presented. So it's here.
It's a made-up enemy. It's a straw person. It's a straw. It's completely ghost enemy, but it's enough to instill fear in people because people, don't have time to study history and they're all overworked. And so we have a question here for one of the attendees here. He says, a question for you. Clearly, if America's present capitalism is closer to Soviet-style communism, it is the powers that be who want us to stop us from creating a mutually helpful society like Sweden and Denmark have. How do we change the narrative? In other words, how do we change the way we converse about this? Because people who want to create a mutually helpful society are always on the defense, and somehow capitalism is always there, has an upper hand as the last order before end of the world. There is no human imagination what comes after capitalism. Definitely not communism, but whatever is coming next, we have abandoned our imagination. And that's what I see as a problem. So what can we imagine that doesn't go backwards, but go forward? So how would you help people change that narrative that is always having this socialism on defensive?
To counter that narrative, I would say that it's sufficient for people to look at American history. This was the argument that it was used during the New Deal under President Roosevelt. All the measures that he implemented, which finally saved capitalism, they were countered, they were criticized at that time by saying that this is just a gradual slouching toward socialism, toward total control of all life, of every aspect of life from the government, from this big government which is out to get us. And this was not true. This never it didn't come true into reality.
Yes, and it's a government as a sort of something that's not us. One of the great grounding I have, that government is good. I mean, that's like heresy here in the United States. But government is by the people, for the people, right?
Yeah.
So government is the way we organize ourselves. So it's a form of like a self-doubt and self-hatred and
Yes.
fear of ourselves.
Which is not true, as I said, by looking at the American experience during New Deal and by looking at experiences of other countries, other capitalist countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, where those measures taken by the government to improve the conditions of the working class or to improve healthcare or to install universal healthcare, they did not change the nature of the system from capitalistic to socialistic. These countries are to this day very capitalist countries and very successful ones as such. So there is no way, there's no need to fear those measures. There's no need to fear that those measures will take us to a Soviet-style dictatorship, which is the assumption made by the conservative side of American.
So the question, Ernest, comes then to how do you, what narrative can help people put fear aside? Sometimes I have these like a Facebook messages or emails from people. I've been a pastor before, so these are members in the churches, and they email me and they say, you know, this is a conspiracy. There is no virus. Socialists are taking over. You know, constantly kind of bombarding me with it because they feed on that. And I resolve to simply respond to them. Look, John, you do not need fear to live. You know,
Absolutely.
Life is too short. We are all too precious. To live passionately, you do not need fear. And I know you want to live passionately. Leave fear aside and passionately move in something constructive. And that seems to work because you're calling them to feel strongly. You're calling them to a cause, but you're inviting them to their better self and saying, look, you do not need fear to feel. You do not need fear to be persistent, to be powerful, to be strong, to be safe.
Yes.
You do not need fear.
And also by giving them the correct information, by telling them
that helps too. I mean, you know, facts.
You don't have anything to fear because, as I said, it has never happened. Look at the other countries, which are very similar to the United States in lots of aspects, but they are not less capitalistic.
Yeah.
They just have more, more advanced safety nets. They have paid leaves for workers. They have health care. They are spending much less in health care. So there's nothing wrong with that. If you tell them that they live in a socialist country, they would be surprised. They never knew that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's just it's just clear to us like a day to you and me, like when we come to United States. But then there's this irrational fear. So there's another person. We'll go a couple of minutes over, everybody, asking here, to live passionately, we don't need fear. How does your regular person fight against the juggernaut of our fear-based journalism and media? So I feel like this is directed to me because I said to live passionately, we don't need fear, is you counteract by stoking a better fire, having fire that is bigger than theirs. You're not going to win against fearful people and convince them by telling them to calm down. You will have, by having a passion that is larger and bigger, a passion for love, a passion for progress, a passion for going forward,
yes,
those kind of things.
And for common good.
And for common good, a passion for common good. And that is something that you don't have to have defensive position and tell people not to fear. Because the last thing that fear needs is to be ignored. See, if you say to somebody who's afraid, don't be afraid, then they're even more afraid, because now they feel they're not cautious, they feel they're ignoring it, their inner life is getting stoked even more. But if you give them facts, that's helpful, but also give them a sense of safety in the motivations and goals of where we want to go. That over time is much more workable, I think, than telling people sort of not to think about the man behind the curtain, because then they're thinking about the man behind the curtain all the time. So,
yes.
So the easiest is to pull off the curtain and say we're going in a different direction.
To approach in a positive way, yes.
Yes, yeah.
We
want a normal country. We want a
good.
decent Western country, which we are not anymore, right? We are neither decent, not normal, nor respectable, and that is dawning on people. And I feel movement forward will come where people see that this has gone too far and they want to restore something they have lost.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Ernest. I want to invite everybody who is watching this live, and if you're watching a recording as well, if you want to get in touch with Ernest Nasto, just send me an email, Google him or Google me, and I'll be able to connect you if you want to interview him for some other cause or place or audience, because he's full of stories and really grounded person. And so thank you, Ernest, for coming here. We are here every Thursday at 3 o'clock. Amy, Allie Palmer is here. She is hosting next week. And then every other week we change, and we will be here at 3 o'clock. You can find also previous episodes on thismomentrally.org. Thismomentrally.org. On that page, you'll find this recording and other recordings as well. Again, thank you, Ernesto. Do you have anything to say to close us?
The only thing that I wanted to close with is that the best reality check to fight fear is to get sound and true information, which is available everywhere, and to think positively, to think that we are fighting for a common good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
My neighbor's good, my neighbor's well-being matters to me as well. Mm-hmm. We cannot approach that in a very individualistic and personalized way, because that way we don't go anywhere. My neighbor's well-being is my well-being. That's how we need to see it.
Yeah, thank you. Just keep on saying this mantra, those of us who are in activism, and rejuvenating our heart and our mind and our bodies and our breathing. Keep coming back to that center, keep coming back to that source of believing and living for the common good. And ultimately, faith, hope, and love will prevail over time. And they have, if you look at the human history. So history is on our side, I think. Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Ernest. If I hear from somebody, I'll be in touch with you. Otherwise, all the best to you in Chicago and in whatever you are doing going to November 3rd. And those of you who are listening,
thank you, Samir.
In this moment, what are you doing? What is your take? What is your creativity? What is your thinking, and what action are you taking as you go to November 3rd, so you can tell your children and grandchildren and neighbors what you have done back then when this was happening. So make your future self proud, I would say. All right, everybody, do something almost unreasonable and as your contribution. Peace, everybody. Bye until next week.